for the endearing words and for the lovely words. It's always a pleasure to be here. Alhamdulillah, today is our Soulful Dialogue programming. We have this project once a month, and we invite great esteemed speakers who are always here giving their experience, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge, sharing their education with us to help the community excel, right? And we're very grateful for that. I know I'm very grateful for that as well. Just like every other program, today we also have a very special speaker here with us. She comes very esteemed. She's a resilient sister in the Muslim community, and I'm sure a lot of you do know her. She has grown up in the community because of her family. Alhamdulillah, her father is very involved in the community, and she works in the Orange County Healthcare Agency. At the same time, she's the director of the mental health department at ICNA Relief. I mean, the list goes on. I don't want to. I'll save more intro for our next program, inshallah. But I would like to thank you for being here today, Sister Deana. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. And I think also just a shout out for this program itself, like even just being able to have different speakers kind of come, and just the willingness and openness of Masjid Omar Farouk of IIOC and the whole team, and you're spearheading this project. So Jazakallah khair as well.
Inshallah, yeah, thank you very much. And I think a lot of this wouldn't be possible without the staff, board members, community members that are here who really makes this event more lively, right? And we really appreciate every single one of you that comes here and gives your absolute to get started. To Sister Deana today, a topic that's very important, and that's identity. When we say identity, can you explain to us why is identity important?
So if I were to ask any of you, who are you? Right? We become very, who are you? Just kind of answer it to yourself. We have a I am, and then whatever comes after that. It's part of who we are. It's what defines us. And it has to do with our image of ourselves and how we show up in the world, in our community, and in the world around us. And so identity, like when we think about it, we know things by what they are and what they're not. So we know light because it's the absence of darkness, right? So we kind of have to know both sides of something in order to be able to actually define what it is. And so identity is how we see ourselves in terms of the self-identity. It's how we, it's who we are. It's our essence. It's what makes us us, right? And what makes me Deana and not Wali, for example, right? And what makes you Wali and not Deana? And so when we look at our community, and we look at everybody in our community, and we look at this, like, I mean, I know we're going to talk about Islamic identity and our Muslim identity in a bit, but identity is the foundation, because that's really what we can stand firm in who we are. And it's not just that we are our name or ourself or our profession, or like there's a lot of aspects to it, but who we are at our core, that's the part that we delve into, and we want that strong Islamic core piece, because that ultimately everything else can change, and that inshallah is the one thing that we want to stay consistent.
And would you say, how often do people struggle with their identity, would you say? Because this is a topic that's most often discussed and talked about. And I'll give you an example. I actually migrated to the US in the year 2000, and I struggled with my own identity, right? Coming from Afghanistan, as a Muslim, as an Afghan, but coming to America where there's multitudes of different identities, right? People coming from different cultures, they had different value systems, they had different ways of doing things, and that really shook me in trying. And when I was out of the house, in the house we have a certain identity with our own household, right? When I was younger, I remember when I would go out to the school and I would hang out with my friends. Over time, you kind of, normally, naturally, learn to develop certain patterns of behavior in the way you do things, right? I still remember, and I will definitely share this with folks. I remember, and I know it's not the most appropriate things to say, but as a guy, we would all most often, I remember in the 2000s, every guy would like drop their pants, called sagging. It was a style. It was a style of the norm in our group. And I remember I tried it once too, and I kid you not, in front of the whole class, my pants dropped. After that, I was like, Ya Allah, no more. I got myself a belt, and that's it. But that was something new for me. Aside from that, but that's just like fun, kind of a fun bit that I wanted to share with you guys. But when it comes to something that's more, at a deeper level, where I would see other friends of mine, go out and hang out, late at nights, do certain things that us as Muslims weren't permissible to do. That's where it became challenging for me, and I was like, wait, like, this is a struggle. What do I do? My parents are telling me one thing, and then when I'm going out and I'm in this circle, in order for me to fit with my group of friends, so that they can accept me, it's like I was trying to fill two shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, how often do people struggle with identity? I know I did. And that's why I shared it with everyone.
Well, if anyone has not struggled with their identity at some given point in time, then let me know and tell us your tips. But I think some of like what you're saying, we are going to struggle with our identity, as many changes as we experience in life. And so I appreciate you actually sharing the part of of exploring, even like trying to fit in. We're social creatures. We are created to be with people. We cannot survive on our own. A baby, like a human child, cannot survive on its own. It would die. So we're created in a way that we are designed to be with people in community. And that's one of the strongest things that drives us in terms of wanting to fit in. It's very normal. And so this becomes, I know when we're sort of teaching, and if we're doing parenting and trying to let parents know, like, your kids are going to go through different struggles, and part of it is exploring. And in the exploration is a gift, because that's where choice comes in, right? And so like in psychology, they do different studies in terms of how is identity formed. And oftentimes there's actually I have this little note printed out, so I want to refer to it because I don't want to butcher this one. But there's 4 different stages, if we think about it, or 4 different situations. Something called identity diffusion, and this is where a person has not explored and has not committed to an identity. Okay, so this is just maybe a person who, if we think about it, it's like they're not even thinking about what it is to be like, to have an identity of like, who am I? And so they haven't really thought about it, they haven't explored it, and they're not committed to something. You have identity foreclosure. So this one, it's like you kind of foreclosed on a house, if you think about it, right? So they sort of adopted whatever identity maybe they got from like their family or what was expected to be. So they're committed to it, but they have not explored other options. So this we often see sometimes, I know, like we see it here for sure, but I'm just thinking about in some of the countries where, for example, your degree or your score in high school on the final exam is what determines which college you can go to, right? If you're going to be if you're going to go into medicine, if you're going to go into pharmacy. But sometimes the family puts pressure, and there's an expectation that someone has to major, like they pick the major for them. So if the person goes on board with it, that's something that maybe they would have, they've committed to it, but they haven't really explored. They don't know they haven't taken general education classes, right? Like, I'm just going to be a doctor because my family told me that's what I have to be. So this is a little bit, they're committed, but they have not done the exploration part. A moratorium is they're exploring a bunch of things, but they have not decided. So this is where we see a lot of times, even with our teens, for example, right? Our adolescents, they're trying out new things. They're, maybe if they're in school, they're looking at the different groups and they're trying to fit in, but they haven't said like, okay, I'm going to be a member of whatever club is on campus, or I'm going to go pursue a specific sport. Like, it's still very diffused. And so there's a lot of exploration that happens. Then there's identity achievement. And this is where a person may have explored different identities, but then they committed to something. So I'd like to think of this, for example, like us, some of us are born Muslim, right? And we're Muslim because our parents told us we're Muslim, and we grew up going to the masjid, we grew up praying, we grew up in this community. At certain points in time, people may experience maybe doubt or maybe just curiosity of like, how do I know this is really, like, how do I know this is it? You know, many of them probably didn't have the guts to tell their parents we're thinking about, you know, we're exploring other things, but it's natural and it's normal to go about this journey. So oftentimes, like I personally remember this in high school. I remember being sophomore year, and I was in a private Muslim school through 8th grade, and then sophomore year high school. So this is my second year with non-Muslims, right? In a primarily non-Muslim environment. And there was this one girl in my world history class, and she was born again Christian. And so her mission was, I'm going to, you know, of course she's trying to save me. And so I sat there and I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, kind of curious. Like I knew I grew up, my family was always like, you can ask critical questions. But like, how do I know it? Like, how do I know Islam is it? And so I told myself in that moment, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go through this journey. I'm not going to tell my parents, but I'm going to go through this journey and just see what I believe in. And I basically told her, I said, okay, you know what? We can do this conversation, but put the books aside, right? Like because you're not going to take you're not acknowledging Quran. And so let's leave the books aside and let's use our logic and just come at it. And I did this. I didn't really know what was going to happen, but I'm like, let's see if it withstands. And at the end, it was just more in my heart of hearts. It was like everything kept going back to the blind faith. And I'm like, but we're using our logic to like arrive at the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, right? And reaching that monotheism piece. So that was a part where I could comfortably say, like in 10th grade, it was like I chose Islam at that point, having just kind of like grown up. But multiple times after that too, where we explore things and then we make a decision.
So would you say it's normal for us as Muslims to question Islam at a certain point, or be like, wait, is this a normal thing?
I think
when it comes to developing your identity as well.
Absolutely, because what makes you, even as you grow through it, right? Like what makes you Muslim, and so people will have different answers. Some will say, I was born Muslim. Some will say, well, I don't know, that's all I know. Some will say, no, I've thought about it and I choose it, right? And so if we can get to a part where it's a choice, like a choice is going to be the strongest level of commitment. And that's even within Islam, we have that, right? The whole idea of all the verses that come through that challenge us to look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's challenges like the reference in the verse will be for those who contemplate, for those who think, for those who use their mind or their intellect. So we're encouraged to do the exploring, if you will, in terms of being able to solidify that identity.
Perfect. And thank you for giving us those examples. Those are very helpful. And it also really helps us understand kind of the differentiations and how the mind really works, right? When some, as human beings. Now, I also wanted to ask if you can touch bases on something that's very important to us. Research has been done on it. It's a model that was researched and developed by Erik Erikson. I believe it was stage 4. It's called identity versus identity confusion stage. And usually, most often, every single one of us at a certain point of time, and majority of students today in America or anywhere they're at, I would say between 10 or 11, starting to like 20, they go through the stage of identity versus identity confusion stage. And then, inshallah, I'll have you talk more upon that. And then, yeah, if you can talk more upon that.
So there's like, this is going to tie right into the exploring of our identities, right? So how many of you, let's see, either you've been around teens, you were a teen yourself, like if you can kind of like go back and, it might have been a while back, but if you can go back and just remember what that time of life was like, right? We're children. We're very connected to our parents. We're connected to our families. And that's all you know. Then this other thing happens where we start going through, through puberty. Maybe we're starting to just, our parents aren't cool anymore. Like they used to be everything. And now we just want to be around our friends, right? So if we can remember that time, that in and of itself is the process of just being able to solidify who we are. We want to know who we are. Like we want to be different enough from our parents, because this is where we start to like develop our own set of values, our own set of like who we are. So every adolescent is going to go through this. Part of the challenge becomes, how do we allow them to figure out that role and be with them in that page, in that journey? So there is a benefit to allowing that process to happen. And if we look at it, we can set them up to succeed a little bit better if we laid the foundation. So if we've laid the foundation with them in their Islamic identity, if we laid a foundation of a love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and understanding Allah and having a positive relationship with Allah, as they get into this phase, they're going to explore different things. Whether or not they share it with us, like it's happening because they exist in a world. We're not with them 24/7. They've got their cell phones. They're in schools. And they can be in public school, they can be in private school, they can be homeschooled, they're still engaging with others. They're going to be curious about what is it that they like, what is it that they don't like. And so they're going to explore, and we want to give those parameters. So the healthy part, if they can come out of it, is we want them to be able to express themselves and to be able to have that foundation where even as they're questioning different parts, if we have a relationship with them where they can come and talk to us, or they talk to another trusted mentor, i.e. some of the youth mentors here at the masjid, or families sometimes will do like little mini study circles with their kids. So just having them be able to talk to someone to explore that. The last thing we want is for them to do all this exploring kind of like on their own, and we have no idea what's happening. But at the same time, if we're too forceful, then they're not sharing certain things, and the exploring is still happening outside, right?
Absolutely. It's something you said very importantly, and I want to touch upon this, and maybe we can explore on this, is that what I usually experience, and when I do get, clients come to us, if it's parents or if it's children, there's a missing link between them. Parents, it's more like there's a disconnect where parents aren't able to give their time and attention in a way where they can fully understand their children. Vice versa, the child or the youth is also having a struggle connecting with their parent. And most often when they come to us, then it's like, it becomes very challenging, and it's very difficult to even get them in the same room at times, because things have gotten so bad in their relationship, where is there a preventative measures that can be taken prior, where I guess parents, or and vice versa, the youth, what is it that they can do to better their relationship with one another, I would say.
That's a great point, and I think it's a very common one, and especially if let's say the parents are born and raised here and the kids are born and raised here and they're all part of the same culture, there's still that disconnect just from the fact of going through this stage in their development in adolescence, right? We already see like almost all adolescents around the entire world, if you ask them, they'll sit there and they'll just be like, they'll talk to their parents as then, you don't know what we're going through, you don't understand us, right? And the parents of course stand there and they're just like, no, we were teens one day too, we know, like, but the times were different, right? But that's a very universal conversation or belief that's typically had among them. So we'll often say, and then put on top of it, if parents, like let's say for example, they immigrated here and the kids are born and raised here, and then there may be a language barrier or there may be a cultural barrier, so then that adds layers to it. Ultimately, it comes down to the communication. It comes down to, are parents able to understand also, like even from our prophetic teachings and so forth. I think it was Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu who said, like, raise your children for their time, right? Not for your time. So it's the idea of being able to have that foresight of, okay, their times are different. So that puts a responsibility on the parents. It puts a responsibility on the parents to become aware of the challenges and aware of what their children are going through. And in essence, if we think about it, like, we can't expect the child necessarily to be able to think at the level of the parent. Like, their brain isn't even fully developed at that part where they have that critical thinking ability, right? Everything for them is like right now. And if it's something that, even if it's something like their anxieties and their worries, it's like the world is going to end like right now. So it's very immediate and it's very permanent. Most of the time you want to tell them, like, this is just one situation. But for them, it really genuinely is their entire world. So to expect them to understand where the parents are coming from, it's not going to, like, they don't have that capacity. So it puts it on the parent to be able to create an environment, whether it's to go and get trained, to attend certain parenting classes, to get mentored in different ways, to talk to other parents, maybe who, and just be able to share some of the struggles, but to create an environment where the kids can actually also know that they are loved unconditionally, right? Like that's a big piece that we hear oftentimes is the kids feel like the parents, like, they're not going to love me if I don't do, whatever it is that they want me to do, right? It's almost like the love is conditional. So the child needs to feel that they're going to have a parent's unconditional love. And that comes from the parent reinforcing that part, letting them know that they can have conversations and that they're going to go through hardships and the parents are there to go through it with them and to get them the support that maybe they need throughout that process.
Perfect. Yeah. And something you touched beautifully is, as parents, it is our duty to really be involved in our child's life as much as we can, right? Because they're going to come to us most often. And if we're not there, and if we're not hearing them, if we're not listening to them, right, it doesn't mean we're going to do what is said. It's just you being able to provide them that space so that way you're able to hear them out and see, well, what's going on. They will go to someone else, like friends and other people in different communities, and which might be, which might misalign with your values and norms now, right? So it's that idea, we call it window of opportunity. Do not lose those window of opportunity with your children, with your spouses, with your loved ones, or with any other human being as well. So thank you for touching on that. I wanted to ask, what are some differences between social identity and self-identity?
So self-identity is how I see myself, right? It's how a person sees themselves. It's their internal set of values. It's what makes us who we are. Social identity is who am I in the midst of, right? When we look at community or we look at in the midst of others, how is it that I am perceived by others as well? And so the self-identity part, like, that keeps us going through. But if you think about it, when we walk into, we talk about intersectionality a lot in identity, right? And there's different aspects of who we are. So for example, I'm a woman, I'm a Muslim woman who wears hijab, who was born and raised here, who speaks English, who, a bunch of other social factors that I can explain. If I walk into a room that I'm the only person in hijab, right? I become very aware of the fact that I'm sort of there's something that I'm different in, right? And that kind of stands out. I always give the example sometimes of, like, where's our power and where's our privilege and where's our source of oppression type of thing. So maybe here I can feel very comfortable, very welcomed. I feel like I'm with family, walking through TSA and getting additional screening, very aware of my Muslim identity in that point as well. But it's on the other side of it, right? And so depending on the situation, depending on the environment that we're in, different aspects of our social identity comes through.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, as we're talking about identity, let's now get into, how do we define the Muslim identity? And that's something you have already shared. But at the same time, I wanted to ask, in terms of environmental, and I know you talked primarily about social, social settings, but would you say environment most often does it play a positive or a negative role in one's identity?
Both, and it depends, right? I'm giving the the safe answer. Like I said, we are born, like we're conditioned, and we have to exist in community. And I know there's always this example of like if you put a bad apple in a barrel with a bunch of other bad apples, what's going to happen? They're going to go bad, right? And so and we have also like even from our like from our Sayyid, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he said like drew the similitude of good company and bad company, right? And good company is like someone who's like, for example, they smell very, very good. They're holding musk, like they smell good. And someone else, and I don't know exactly like what nafakh al-kir would be, but they're like blowing, like let's just say it's like more of like charcoal and like that smell, right? So the smell is going, like you're going to be impacted. Huh? The coal and the iron. Okay, so yeah, like it's just kind of that like smoky, not necessarily good scent versus musk, right? Which one would you rather, reap? Like you'd rather smell like musk, right? So the idea though is that whatever our company is, when we're sitting in the midst of that company, we're going to be affected, even if we're not doing it ourselves, even if we're not holding the musk or we're not blowing, the iron and the coal and all that like ourselves, we're going to be impacted by it. And so it can go both for positive. It can have a positive impact, and it can also have a negative impact. Sometimes, and we hear this a lot too with youth and maybe young adults as well, but they'll turn around and it's kind of like, yeah, like, my friends, like we're going, like we used to go to the masjid, and one of them now they're kind of veering a little bit off, and I just feel like I want to stay with them because I want to make sure that they still have that connection to be able to come back. Right. And so it becomes more of a challenge because the intention is to make sure that they're able to benefit and kind of keep that lifeline open. But sometimes they'll feel like, okay, I'm going to spend more time with them. But if we're spending more time with them in actions maybe that are not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in context and situation, even if we're okay, we get impacted. We get impacted sometimes by ways of it just sort of like etches away, that we start normalizing things that maybe otherwise should not be normalized. It's like, okay, well, it's not a big deal. Well, my intention is good. And it becomes a slippery slope. So it's being very intentional and mindful that the environment that we choose to spend our time, like there's other ways to still help and also be able to protect our own soul, our own spirit, our own self, and our actions.
And I wanted to ask if you can explore a little more on this notion that I know you're working in the community very heavily. What are some of the encounters you have when it comes to young Muslims? Like, what are some of the common challenges they're facing currently? If you can share that with us.
Oh, there's a lot.
We've got time.
But I know. I mean, I know one of the things, and this is the Fajr. Okay.
Sheikh just said Fajr is at 6, so we're good.
No, but these are the conversations that we want to have, right? And sometimes we're grateful that, even as we encounter this, the fact that we're encountering it, like we're still being able to have those conversations and find ways to mitigate. But there's a huge part that, regardless, there's the being Muslim sometimes. Like if there's a lot of youth, sometimes they're questioning it. And they're like, we don't really know, like it's not necessarily always the cool thing to be. And so it's not my job in that capacity to be like, okay, well, let's get you the Islamic studies course going, right? Or let me convince you that this is where, that we need to have a re-education of our deen. But that's one of the serious challenges that we're having, and we see right now, even with everything that's happening on the media, for those who are not in Islamic environments, like in their school, they're affected by bullying and Islamophobia. And that's a huge, huge issue that, sometimes we just think like, oh, okay, our kids are going out there, we're Muslim, we make them feel good about being Muslim, they're going to be able to withstand all that. And the truth is, they go through a lot. And so it's from Islamophobia. It's from challenges of even with drugs. Like we don't talk about substance use enough. We don't talk about drugs enough, but it's there. And when they do studies and they look at people who are in high school, the percentage of high schoolers who use or who've experimented, again, this is part of identity, right? Like, and part of the exploring is like, let's just kind of see what it's about. But the percentage that have used that freshman year, compare it to senior year, it's like almost everybody, like by the time they're a senior, have tried at least something. And our youth are they're not immune. Like, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them, but we have to be able to have these conversations. The idea of not being able to share things or just be open with their families about their struggles, it kind of creates more of that rift.
And we will get to it. We'll get to the question. I'll ask one more question, and then I'll go ahead and open it to the audience if anybody has any questions, inshallah. I wanted to ask, how do we provide strong community support to our youth to help them achieve their self-confidence, to say, right? Because self-identity is also, I believe, is also associated with self-worth. So what would you say is, like, what's the best way to help provide that support to our youth?
Start before they ever even come into this world, right? Because it does starts with us. But even with that, as you know, it's never too late, as long as like we're still breathing on this side of the earth. There's still hope, and there's still chances for us to be able to make things better. So helping them cultivate their self-worth, like a big part of it is, as a community, being able to have conversations like this, and to hopefully bring them on board too, and just kind of go to them and ask, like, what is it that they're experiencing? What are the challenges? And from their standpoint, what would be helpful for them? So definitely involving them in the conversation is critical. But for us as a community, like, number one, I'm going to actually go back to parents, creating an environment at home that they do feel that unconditional love. And so if there's been a lot of struggles where maybe there's been hardships, there's no problem going to seek professional support. I'm not even going to say help. It might not even be like a severe psychological issue. It's just more of communication. And how do we communicate? And sometimes what we think we're communicating and what's received on the other end are two completely different things. And so if parents turn around and they're just like, well, I didn't mean that, like, why are they taking it that way? That's not going to help. But being able to come from a place of like, okay, here's what I'm trying to communicate. Can we get someone who might be able to help us make sure that we're understanding one another, right? And that's what sometimes different therapy, like counseling, can do. It's just more of, how do we work on our communication skills that we can kind of get on the same page and realize that we want the same thing. The unconditional love, I'm going to keep reiterating that part, where we want our youth and our children to feel like no matter what, they're going to be loved. We may not agree with some of their choices. We may not agree with, with certain things that they do, but like, parents have a responsibility to love their children. Like, that's, again, and we can differentiate between an action, like we may not agree, we may not approve of what they're doing, but they're still our kids at the end of the day. And that's something that that sometimes we need a little bit of practice with too. As a community, highlighting, like creating fun activities, which I think, mashallah, this masjid does a great job. I just heard that there's going to be a youth camp and they're going to Aquarium of the Pacific, but for them to be in good company. So if we can create opportunities for them to be in good company. I know, like, back in the day, they used to do, not back in the day that long, but a couple of years back, maybe a couple of masajid would do like a joint Eid prayer. And yes, it could have been very costly, but the sheer volume and number of Muslims, like as they walk into the stadium and you just see it filled with Muslims, it's like, this is our community, right? There was just a mass convention that took place over Thanksgiving break. But for them to be surrounded and to see positive examples, that's how we can support them, right? Because they want to be able to see people who look like them, that they can relate to and identify with, who are successful, who are confident. Because this entire generation right now, and just everything that's happening with social media, our youth are constantly doubting themselves. Like, it's part of the algorithms that just keep them either succumbing to like different peer pressure types of stuff, whoever quote unquote the enemy is, but certain industries definitely benefit from us not having our self-worth and not feeling confident in ourselves, right? We're always a consumer of some product or some messaging that's going to come out there.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Sudina. And I think one of the other things that's very important is I think for all of us as parents should know that something you just said that's very important is how social media and other industries, they try to take a grasp of the youth. And that's just part of the plan, right? For them, how do they make money? Is off of the younger generation. And there's an article, if anybody's interested in reading, it's called Digital Natives versus Immigrant Natives. It's written by a gentleman named by Mark Prensky, and he talks about how the brain works. Folks that were born prior to the digital world, like cell phones, tablets, computers, the use of technology and internet, social media, and how they are able to sit down and listen to long lectures without being bored, right? Or going into long, going with their parents to social gatherings and enjoying things. Now, in today's society, there's research that's done is that with digital native immigrants, the mind has shifted. We've got a shorter attention span. If you tell your kids, hey, let's go to a certain event, it's boring, I don't want to go. And the parents are like, wait, why aren't you coming? Well, guess what? This has become their world now. This is their best friend. This is what I like to call it. This is our best friend now. We go around because everything is through the means of social media. That's how the world functions now. But it also tells us there's more research on it, so I don't want to, I can go deep dive into it, but it also talks about how it alters short-term memory deficits and how it affects it. But then that's something we can talk about later. But if anybody is interested and if you want to talk more on that, it's called Digital Natives versus Immigrant Natives. It's a nice small little article if you want a research article if you want to read through it. Yeah.
I wanted to, it's so true. And I think they looked at this a while back, but in terms of like, how many people actually sit down and have dinner as a family? Like nowadays. It's so rare. It's so rare. Or if they do, everybody is like, they may all be sitting at the table, but everybody is holding like some type of electronic device, whether it's the iPad or if it's the phone. And so this whole idea of actually being with each other and connecting, like that's one of the issues right now that we're seeing. Like when they look at people who end up with addiction, like the opposite of addiction or the antidote to addiction. Does anyone know what it is? They're like, you didn't tell us we're going to have a quiz, but the opposite of the antidote to addiction is connection. It's actually connection. And if people can feel connected with each other, but right now everyone's like, oh, how connected are you? Well, how many followers do you have? Like, that's my reach, but that's not real connection. But being able to sit down together. So kind of back to that point of like, no, it's boring. But even training and sometimes being able to create certain, if it's not dinner, but if it's some other type of time where the family sits together and they maybe share different things that they're going through, or they create their own ritual, whatever that looks like for the family. But that also gives the children, like as they're growing, they feel like they have a solid foundation, right? They feel like regardless of what's happening out in the world, that like the home environment is a safe place for them to be able to share some of the challenges and struggles. So that's just another pitch for quality time.
Awesome. I'm going to keep pause now, and I would like to open the floor to our attendees. If anybody has questions, I know the sister right in the front. Sister, would you like to go? I know you had a question.
One of the things that a lot of teenagers and young peer pressure and how they cannot be
Yeah. How do they, okay, so the question is sort of like a lot of college students sometimes may experience challenges with peer pressure and then parental pressure as well. And so how they go about navigating that? I have to ask some of them. No, I'm trying to like go back in my brain of like even connecting to that time. So oftentimes, I mean, depending on the situation, if college students live, like if they're living on campus or they're living away from home, that peer pressure is going to be very strong. And so the parental pressure, unless they're there, it's just more of like they've internalized that pressure, or maybe it's more of an expectation that they know that they're supposed to be this certain way.
Well, like you said, the parents
Okay.
it's in vogue to be a model.
Okay.
Yeah, just having.
So maybe even in terms of so the pressures as it comes to expectations, like what should they be? So maybe the parents want them to be a doctor, but their environment might be like, okay, be a model or go into art and like, yeah. No, and that's real and that's so beautiful. I appreciate that you brought that up, because then it becomes a matter of what about them? Right? So like if we think about peer pressures coming from here, parental pressures coming from here, exactly. And so that's part of the exploring part, that if they just cave into, I'm going to go with what the peers want, is that truly genuinely what they want? Is that their choice, or is it more like, so we would love for an opportunity for them to get to a point of maybe it is, explore in different places, but whatever decision, it's grounded in something that aligns with their own values, but this requires them to also know what their values are. Right? And part of the way that we know what our values are is that we kind of put them to the test. In a way, we have to push that, we push it a little bit. Ideally, we want to do that a lot earlier, where we have the safeguards and we have like those guardrails, like of our, our family being around and our mentors in the community being around to kind of keep those guardrails up. Right? So we can kind of explore, but it's almost like when you go bowling and they have, what are the bumpers? Yeah. So we want to fill the entire bowling lane, like that lane, with people in the community and family that can be those bumpers where they can get there, right? But something's going to kind of bring them back. And so it goes back to their own, like what aligns with them and what is their own self, that self identity part. There was another
Yes.
question, but I don't know.
With yourself, right?
So my son, he's here. And I'm going to give you a little background to explain. I just finished my master's in psychology. As I'm studying, he's very interested or participating in studying, reading my articles, which is amazing. But there came a point there was a video that he found that was called The Information of Loneliness. And he enjoyed it very much. It basically talks about how using social media, you can present yourself in a different way. You can edit, you can review, you can appear something different. So when I sat with him, I said, this isn't who I want to be. He said, well, I'm lonely, and this is how I feel connection. So when I come to him and I say, put the phone away, dinner, put the phone away, let's do this, it feels like I'm forcing him. And he verbalizes, you're forcing me to do this, and I don't want to. How do you reconcile, that level of emotional intelligence with parental guidance?
That's a yeah.
In my family, we just had to practice being here and now.
Oh, okay.
First, be online or in my laundry, somewhere else watching TV. This interactive time, you have some quality, so you don't have to be here and you get anything. And then we just start. So like family will
So yeah, thank you. Is one way. I want to just repeat, because I don't know if everybody heard it, but it was more, the question was around, for example, if it's more of, how do I even summarize your without reiterating it, but basically it's like if we do want to establish more of the family time or the quality time, the young person, the young adult, may feel like, no, I'm being forced, this isn't what I want to do. Like there's a way of being able to kind of present to the world in a certain way, different maybe than what is internal, or what they feel, but it's more of a sense of loneliness. But if bringing them to be like, let's connect, in their mind, in the young person's mind, it comes off as, you're forcing me, I don't want to do this. A recommendation, and I don't know, because I'm sure there's a lot of other aspects to it, and you having just, mashallah, completed your master's, congratulations, may have also some insight to it. But sometimes it's giving them still the choice of, here's the parameter that I want. I want to connect. Like I want to spend some quality time with you. What would that look like for you? But you're creating the frame of like, here's the outcome that we want, but maybe dinner to him, it's like, I don't want to sit and have dinner, right? Maybe it looks like something else. It's doing an activity, but then you're still kind of having that, you're hearing from him, and it kind of puts him also in the ability to make that choice. And it's more of, let's figure out what this could look like for us.
And if
You're
I may
welcome.
add, you said your son is, how old was he?
18.
19,
18.
18, yeah. The other aspect would be something that can help you in the household would be the father. Okay. So that would have been the other key solution, because for a young man at that age to be able to adhere to things, he needs a male role model. That's what it is. Yeah. And I mean,
No,
yeah, no.
alhamdulillah, and
May Allah bless you
that's
for that.
awesome. Yeah, and sometimes that's hopefully where we have that community support, right? Because the reality is, there's a lot of, we do have a lot of women who are raising children, young adults on their own, and it's very tough, right? So it's more of like, how then can we create more supportive environments, because that can kind of fill that role. That's not there just because it's not.
And
may Allah reward you.
asking for help is also okay, really. Yeah, if support is needed, additional support, do it, because it will really benefit and help out as well. I think one of the brothers, yeah,
We'll
and then
try
we'll
to
come back there.
balance it. Yes.
To be honest, this identity is very, very. I know, parents are struggling when it comes to their identity themselves, and also the children are suffering when it comes to their identity. Sometimes, let's say, the parents themselves, someone is Lebanese, the wife is, let's say, from another country, and they migrated here to America. And their child, let's say, he was born here, so he's never been in Lebanon, never been in another country.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes this is one of the issues that really pushes the kids away, that they want to instill the values, or let's say, they force them to have that belonging to Lebanese identity, or let's say Egyptian, for example. And sometimes I can see this in marriage. Like, for example, the son was born here, let's say from the AC background, and then the parents, they will not let him marry someone that is not from the same race. Where actually he defined himself as
American. Exactly.
Muslim. The only thing that I want to follow up is that when you say a Muslim identity, I think this will help us a lot to, it can make the life of our kids much easier, because sometimes, like the example she mentioned, I want to be a model, or I want to be. So here the Islam, we're supposed to, as a friend, just tell, okay, you want this, but Islamically, if it's halal or haram, here where, as you define yourself as a Muslim, it has to take role. But cultural issues. But let's say, how would you define a son? His father is Lebanese, mother, let's say, Indian, born here in America, a Muslim, and he wants to define himself. What do you think he will say?
He's going to say, I'm an American Muslim.
And a lot of kids, this is the thing, they feel ashamed.
That they're American Muslim,
Yes.
because of the energy that the parents have on the term
They
American.
feel that they are American without mentioning that
Yeah.
their parents and nationality that now you are neglecting your father.
Subhanallah.
I've seen that with a lot of even some adults, like they come here, they start having they change their name, like Muhammad Mo. It goes like even though you've never been in America, only for 1 month,
Yeah.
each name.
Yeah.
I mean, the sad part is that, like, we talk about the identity, and I appreciate that you brought that up, that we also have to talk about the parents' identity, right? Because the parents are bringing an aspect to the equation. Like, they are also variables in this equation of identity formation. And unfortunately, the parents also need a lot of like a reboot in terms of understanding, because the nationalistic cultural aspects that come up, we embrace and honor them as long as they're not in opposition to Islam, right? So Islamic identity has to be the number one. And so sometimes it's even sitting with them and saying, like, what does it mean to be American Muslim? And we have the conversation sometimes, and I'll say, like, I was born and raised here. My family is from Egypt, and whenever we'd go to Egypt, I would try to be Egyptian, but I was never Egyptian enough, right? And then here, it's like, okay, I'm definitely not American enough just because the way I dress. That's by itself automatically you're not American. Where are you from? And it's like, I was born and raised here. I'm more American than you because you've only been here for, whatever amount of time. But this is the reality. And so they actually have this there's a book, or there's a phenomena called third culture kids, which is like basically people who don't fit in anywhere. And this is the beauty if we have our Islamic identity wherever we go, if me being Muslim is the first part of who I am, is that connection, then that doesn't matter where I am. That's strong enough for me to have it. But we ask people, what does it mean to be American Muslim? Some people will say, no, you have to say Muslim American, right? The other way. Because being Muslim first. Did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. So a lot of times it will be more of like, oh, we don't, and I remember this kind of like, what does it mean? It's like, oh, we're very straightforward, right? We say what we mean. We're on time, right? Like, that's the culture of, like, that is the, no, but seriously. And I sat there one time and I was like, hey, we're in Egypt, and I was trying to communicate. Someone asked me something, and basically it was my friend's dad. I had just met him for the first time. I was like, oh, our family's in America too. Like, I'm like, yeah. He's like, where are you in? I'm like, California. And he's like, oh yeah, they're in Sacramento. I'm like, okay. He's like, so a little bit later, he's just like, would you say that Sacramento, like, is it nice? And I was like, I mean, Sacramento's okay. Like, I mean, if you're going to go visit as a tourist, you're probably not going to have Sacramento on top of your list for California, but it's okay.
You don't want to offend Sacramento
Not
people.
the right answer. Apparently not the right answer. So the next day she sees me. She's like, Dina, you could have just said it was fine. It was nice. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, he asked me a question. I was just answering honestly. And she's like, you hurt his feelings. You made it seem like his family's not in a good place. Yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness, subhanAllah, that was not my intention at all. And I said it was okay, but like, so there's this whole other layer. So it's realizing then that it's like, okay, maybe I'm a little too American in that situation.
If I can add on to that, I'll give an example, which I told this day I do, right? And the way what I do is, growing up here, I think to your point, we just like to be very straightforward, and and kind of don't go around discussion. It's like, okay, let's just say it as is, and call it, like blunt, call it as is, and that's it. My father, I'll say, and I'll share this. It's a cultural thing, and what it is that and what I've noticed as I've gotten older, even with my father and other folks in the community, it's like there's a way you gotta word things and the way you gotta present things to them to be seen respectful, and for you to hold them of high, esteemed in your life. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. I actually go to Sacramento a couple of times a month once a month, I have
do too.
I have projects, right? And then there's times where I'll call my dad and I'll say, Assalamu alaikum, I have a question I wanted to ask you. And he's like, what is it? I'm like, I want to drive up to Sacramento and I'm planning to take one of my cars. And I know my car is in good condition, it's brand new, it'll go without any problems. But I say it just for the sake of him feeling that he's still like me as a son, I still need him. So I do that for his sake, So that's how the cultural aspect of it is, and So again, it's one of those things, like you said, it's different, but it's in good feelings. That's what we do.
But I'll add one thing to that too. Try translating what you want to say. You're thinking in English, and then you're going to translate that to Arabic, for example. It does not always sound. It doesn't always work. And sometimes it comes off a lot more. Like my mom sometimes will just sit there and look at me, and I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Are you trying to say this?" Like, and then she'll have to say in Arabic, and I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "It just sounds very like cold when you like that's not how we say it, or it doesn't make sense, or it's almost offensive." And so it's navigating those pieces with it. But if yeah, without tact. But if we hold each other to, like you said, if it's coming from a place of love, it's coming from a place of wanting to connect, it's coming from a place of respect, then like if that's how we know our MO is in the house, then there will be a lot more grace in terms of understanding, because oftentimes it's like it's not the intention, and so we have to pause. Otherwise, the parents react and the children react, and we don't want them to react. We want them to pause, think, respond.
Yeah, absolutely. Inshallah, we are getting close to our time. Maybe we'll ask for two more questions or so.
There was one in the back over there.
You kind of answered a little bit of my question, and I don't know if she said, so like, if you have parents who are coming from a very strong background in culture, honestly, going up here, we are in like a culture where we include everyone from different. So if you want to try and raise some people in that culture, parents are like very strongly opposed to it, regardless of whether they're Muslim or not. I would not think that's such a big problem, especially coming from parents, especially like second or third generation immigrants. It's such a hard thing for them to come and understand the table just because this person's from a different culture that doesn't know that. So how can you navigate that in this generation?
So navigating almost like interracial marriages where maybe the parents are very adamant about the person having to be from the same ethnic background, for example. Subhanallah. Yeah, and that's and the irony comes from sometimes from having to, sometimes draw some examples. Like people, there's good, like we go for character. Like even Islamically, if we're going to go on the basis of why is it that we marry a person, and character, like it is a huge aspect. In those situations, sometimes it's involving someone, like involving a sheikh that they may respect, or another family elder, like elders within the family who they may respect. It's hard, and I'm sorry that it exists for everyone who experiences that, because it's not our deen. Like it's so not our deen. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide the parents and allow them to be able to see that at the end of the day. And this is sometimes where like the imam can help, and like maybe sometimes some professionals. It's more of seeing like what ultimately is it that they want. Do they want their daughter or their son, like whoever it is? Typically, unfortunately, ends up being the daughter. But do they want their child to be happy, to be in a relationship that is based on trust, respect, love, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like having that God consciousness? So if we can figure out what the foundation, like what is it that we want, does this person meet those criteria, then maybe they'll be able to see it otherwise. And I would just say a lot of dua, like, because subhanAllah, like dua is powerful, and sometimes that can change their heart, inshallah. Yeah. Yeah, subhanallah. And that's everybody's journey. So there can be the same mom and have multiple children, and each child has different character, different personality traits. Subhanallah.
And let's say today's, if a parent says no today, doesn't mean tomorrow it's not going to be a yes, right? How if somebody feels at this moment will eventually change. But but I'll take a couple of things though. Number one of the sad reality of human beings are that even if you're from the same country, there's internal racism
Mhm.
embedded. That's just a fact, and I see that as well. And then secondly, when it comes to, let's say, a parent or somebody not accepting someone in marriage, you just have to give it time. That's what it is, right? Certain parents, they push hard, but unless there's time not given for two parties to meet, to sit, to be able to see the good in them, it just becomes very challenging and struggling. But there are folks that actually deep inside, like it's just you just can't convince, or you just can't, whatever you do, it's just not going to work. That's all. But then at the end of the day, the sheikh is here as well. He can help us. But at the same time, you just got to do your best, whatever you think is mostly important. It's your Islamic right? What does Islam tell us? And that gives us the best path towards what we need to do.
It is hard. But that's part of the, like, there's always a quote that says, like, you're free to choose, but you're not free from the consequences of your choices, right? So we do have that, we have the ability to choose. And technically, I mean, sometimes if the parents are not adhering to Islamic principles in a way, it's like, do the children technically have a right to go and, but there's going to be consequences, right? And so it's navigating that and being able to see, like, how this is where, of course, like, imams and professionals will be able to at least support and allow people to kind of go through and just be like, what could it look like? Are you willing to take on that risk? And then if not, then leave it in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands and just trust.
From experience, you kind of bring that up, showing that their own tradition went like that, they might be
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's actually very important. And
Can I reiterate
and
it, just in case they didn't hear?
yeah, can you?
Okay, so basically, if sometimes when parents are coming from that place, it's because they're afraid that, for example, their grandchildren are not going to uphold their traditions. And so being able to mitigate that fear by letting them know that, there's still a strong aspect of the identity that's going to get passed on, or the cultural traditions are going to get passed on as well, that may alleviate some of their concerns and their fears.
And lastly, to add on to it, right, is how do you give the confidence for someone, or like a parent, to know that, okay, you know what, it's okay to do this. You have to show them that you're the one putting the time and the effort into this, right? If you're doing what you need to do to give that confidence to your parents, then they'll kind of back off and say, okay, they got things under control, right? And we'll just go one more question, and then we'll end, inshallah. Yes. Yeah.
It's not always when a parent says something that they're wrong. Even if it's coming from a different culture, right? Even if they're saying, for example, you should marry somebody within your own whatever culture, that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, there's a lot of positives that come when there's similarities in culture. So it's not always like a bad thing. And I'm trying to stress that out too. I mean, I have
Absolutely.
parents, different, right? But when I also see, okay, the positives and negatives of what they're trying to say as well, and try to acknowledge that, hey, not everything that our parents says is wrong, or even if it's contradictory to this culture, doesn't necessarily make it wrong.
Yeah, so
100%.
the idea that not everything that the parents say necessarily is inherently wrong, even just because it's different. But I think what I had heard the question was more of, it was coming from a place of, for example, they're not to be like, we can't trust people from that culture. So it wasn't a matter, it was more of a,
So like, if somebody, and I think culture not stay the same, but like culture. It's kind of hard to believe
yeah.
because, I'm always like it's good for us, and we don't need to follow stuff.
So, and there's an element, I think there's an element, this is where sometimes even family, I'm just going to pitch counseling everywhere here, but sometimes even family counseling in that situation of being able to understand where, like, let's understand what the root cause is. Because again, we typically say things and there's a lot, it's an iceberg. There's so much beneath the surface that we don't necessarily know and we haven't articulated. So we don't know if the parent is coming from a place of, okay, we're afraid or we're worried or we're just biased and we want to be able to have, family gatherings and we want to all speak the same language. I mean, it's valid. They have a right to want that. And where is the parent's child coming from, like the young person? I don't want to call him a child, but the young person. So sometimes even being able to have conversations to sift through and understand why people are, what's at the core. Because if we can get to the core, what is their want or what is that fear, and we can address it and alleviate it, typically will solve most of the issues, inshallah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very important. Like, yes, not necessarily what the parents sometimes say is wrong, but the issue is, I'm talking about, let's say, just want to take this scenario. A girl who was born here, grew up in America, having her freedom, seeing, and being, the constantly thing that, going out, having mutual conversation, the man, it doesn't have that, authority over her to control her, as a husband. And regardless, let's say, this is how they grew up. And bringing this person to marry someone from culture, let's say, someone from back from Lebanon, like we expect the husband comes, that the wife is cleaning up and she makes the food, and if I say no, she doesn't have the right to negotiate. Why no? Why not?
Yeah.
How dare you, negotiate? This is how a lot of Arabs are. And bring this person to marry someone with this, or the opposite, either man or woman.
Yeah.
Woman. I think I've seen a lot of divorce cases, or a very miserable life
Yes.
for the woman. The moment that her kid grew up and she feels independent, she would ask for divorce.
Yes.
I've seen, and it goes like they're not matching here. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of how they deal. But it's probably both of them, they inherit this culture, they know how the future is gonna be. I think they can live together. But
I think it goes into that compatibility phase, right? Like, and what people are willing to do. Again, I'm going to do another plug, but this one for premarital counseling. Because these expectations, this is what lays the foundation for a healthy relationship and a healthy marriage. And it goes into identity, because like for her, for example, if let's say, for example, she's used to working and now someone comes and says you can't work. But if
if you say to my wife, American Lebanese, because I'm coming from Lebanese children, so why you take American? You're Lebanese. And
Yeah.
then when I came here, I started saying, no, there is a lot of differences.
It is. And it's not that something is better or worse. Like, I think that's a part that sometimes people get stuck on, the judgment. It's just different. It's an environment. It's why you have, fish that live in salt water. They don't thrive. They're not going to make it in fresh water. And you have fish that live in fresh water. And which one's better? You can't say. It's whichever one it needs for it to be able to thrive and have that community. So it is part of the identity, and being able to understand each other's identities is important. And to see, that's one of the things that we typically do in like the premarital, is understanding what are the expectations, what's important for each one of them. Are they willing? Are they willing to be able to, adapt to the other partner or not? And if the answer is no, then it's better that they, find another partner in that point. So, okay.
Awesome. Thank you. Inshallah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to come and ask Sister Deana or myself. Again, thank you so much, Sister Deana, for giving us your time and the great knowledge that you have had. So thank you so much. If anything else you'd like to say before we conclude, please.
Just want to say Jazakumullah khair, because like this would mean nothing if we didn't have all of you here. So we're very grateful for your participation and just your interest and commitment to learning something different today. So, Jazakumullah khair.
Well, thank you for being here. Alhamdulillah, our community is very, very active. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.